A criminal love story. One thing I've realized is that revenge isn't always satisfying. My life needed to be filled with light, not darkness. I didn't want to participate in this game anymore, where every move only brings me closer to destruction. My name is Helen, and I never thought I would find myself at the center of a story that could grace the pages of a crime novel. But life throws up surprises sometimes, and my path collided with a dark world that I had previously thought was only fiction. It was in the fall, when the leaves began to fall and the wind made me shiver, and that's when I met him-Nico. The first time I laid eyes on Nico, I felt my heart flutter. He was tall and slender, with dark hair and eyes that sparkled like stars in the night. I felt both fear and attraction at the same time, but I was sure this guy was definitely not from our quiet town. He looked like he could be the hero of a gangster movie or, on the contrary, its main villain. Our paths crossed at a bar not far from my house. I was sitting alone, sipping a cocktail and thinking about my life incomplete and boring, about 12 years of working in an office, about how year after year I was slipping into routine. And that's when Nico walked up to me. His confidence and charisma instantly overshadowed everything around him. We started talking. The first meeting went like magic, laughter, sparks and exciting moments. He talked a lot about his life, but I realized that not everything was true. There was danger and adrenaline coming from him. He talked about his job, making me think he was just a salaried employee in the business world. But the tone of his voice and the glint in his eyes spoke of something else. I realized I was diving into a risky game, but that didn't stop me. My existence was devoid of adventure, full of boring days and monotonous routine. Nico became my weekend getaway, my secret world, and as time went on, feelings began to build. I fell in love with him, realizing that I was treading a delicate and dangerous path. He arranged romantic dates, wooed me lavishly, gave me flowers, and we even went on trips to resorts in Miami. All in all, I was happy. Our relationship grew quickly, and soon he became the night demon of my thoughts. But his dark secrets began to reveal themselves. One evening as we sat in his car looking at the starry sky, he was very reluctant to tell me about his affairs. Nico was involved in some shady deals, but believed he had everything under control. I naively believed I could change him. Soon I began to notice him changing. Confident and charismatic, Nico was gradually turning into an anxious and wary man who would lie awake at night and always put his phone on silent. He was becoming unavailable, and the attraction that had once beckoned me began to fade away. I began to realize that he was using me as an escape from reality. He was skillfully manipulating my feelings, making me feel unimportant while insinuating that I was the only one he trusted. The turning point came one rainy night when I went to see him again, at his request. It was raining outside the window, and cold drops were beating on the glass, creating an atmosphere full of melancholy and expectation. I felt a strong urge to see him. This sharp tangle of emotions still kept me awake, but when I entered his apartment, something seemed strange. There was an elusive tension in the air that seemed to disrupt the usual order of things. He was on the phone with someone in a quiet, tense voice. As soon as I entered, he hung up abruptly, as if he had remembered something important, as if an icy wave of realization had come over him. This sudden reaction made me uneasy. He looked alarmed, his eyes glittering with an intensity one hadn't noticed before. I need to leave for a while. Stay here, he said without looking at me, his voice sounding cold and distant. I took a step forward towards him, but he backed away and there was an expression in his eyes that made fear and doubt sweep over me, making me freeze anxiously. I didn't understand what was happening or why he changed so suddenly. For a few more moments, I stood in disbelief, consumed by fear and uncertainty. He walked out and the apartment was left in silence, ominous and frightening. I sat there, waiting, hoping that he would return soon, that everything would be all right, and we could talk, clear up any misunderstandings. The time dragged on endlessly, each sound becoming more and more disturbing. Suddenly, I heard the door open with a crack. A group of powerful men in black suits entered the apartment. Their confident movements and cold stares immediately struck fear into me. Everything inside me clenched like a spring ready to jump out. I felt that this situation was out of control. Suddenly, the realization hit me like a burning flame. They had come for Nico. And it became painfully obvious that I was just a pawn in his cunning game. My first reaction was panic. I tried to find a way out, but the room seemed smaller and smaller, like a nightmare with nowhere to go. The feeling of betrayal came over me like a deadly cold. All those moments of togetherness, all his promises, all our conversations suddenly appeared to me as a deception. I realized that he was using me to hide from his problems, which were now falling on my head. Unable to contain my fear, I froze in place, replaying the moments of our interaction over and over in my head, trying to analyze where I might have failed to see that he was hiding his true intentions. Each of these men radiated menace, and I knew I had no chance of escaping the imminent. Their presence clearly indicated that Nico was no longer in control of the situation. They took pleasure in taunting me, stripping me of the last vestiges of confidence and strength. I was nothing, just a means to their ends. Finally, after many minutes of torment, they dumped me in some dingy alleyway in the rain. The cold drops beat down on me as if they were trying to wash away all my hopes and dreams. I drowned in my thoughts, struggling with the realization of how I'd ended up in this position. Pain and betrayal mixed with rage, and I knew I couldn't forgive Nico for setting me up. The feeling of pain from the betrayal intersected with the rage that was building up inside of me, filling every cell in my body. How could he set me up like that, use me as a bargaining chip in his game? And in that moment, a plan for revenge was born in my mind. I spent the next few days painstakingly collecting my thoughts, trying to make sense of what had happened. The feeling of hopelessness was gradually replaced by determination, and one evening, I felt the courage to act. I turned to my acquaintances who had connections with his business, and soon learned more about his business than I could have guessed. The darkness into which Nico had shrouded his life had seemed inexhaustible, but now I saw the possibilities. I listened to their conversations with genuine interest, memorizing every detail. Soon I was able to access contacts and resources I didn't even know I had. Using my new knowledge as a shield, I pretended to want to enter the business as if it were my sincere desire. My true goal was not to become a part of this sinister business, but to break Nico's ties and expose his horrible manipulations and dirty secrets to his competitors. I knew I had to proceed with caution. Every move had to be deliberate. I misled the people around me, giving the appearance of interest and willingness to cooperate with them, while recording information I could use. When I finally accepted that Nico wouldn't look for me, much less admit his own mistakes, I felt my confidence grow. I orchestrated my revenge with the coolness of a strategist, devising a plan like a jeweler creating an exquisite piece. I used his secrets, turning everything against him. Exposing his lies was just what I needed. Nico's business was starting to come apart, his reputation visibly shaken, and I savored every moment of his downfall. My plan worked, and soon Nico found himself in the hands of the very men in black suits who had once threatened me. I enjoyed watching his fall from the sidelines as a silent witness. Each of his shocks brought me unimaginable joy. I remembered how he'd looked down on me, as if I were something low and insignificant, but now he was the victim himself, losing his status and power. I smiled at the thought of his disappointment, of how he finally felt the weight of his betrayal and lies. Then he disappeared. He hadn't been seen for months, and I had all but forgotten about him, immersing myself in my new life. But suddenly, when I stopped expecting him to show up, he came back. The one who had once seemed like a tall, slender, and confident hero to me now looked completely different. Nico came to me haggard, with faded eyes that had lost the dangerous dark glint I knew so well. He seemed to be this world depressed, broken under the weight of loss and disappointment. The moment I expected him to turn to his old connections and find out the truth, perhaps even try to avenge my defeat, something unexpected happened. He fell to his knees in front of me without strength, as if he could no longer bear his own weight. His voice sounded shaky and depressed. "Helen, I've lost everything. Could you help me?" I froze, dumbfounded by his act. At that moment, all my anger and bitterness that I had carried through my victories suddenly collided with a deep sadness. I saw myself in him when I was experiencing it myself, the fear of being abandoned, of being left to my own devices. In front of me stood not just a gangster, not a dangerous man from the dark world, but a wounded, frightened man with his own fears and pain. In that moment, my worldview cracked, and my revenge seemed less important than simple human understanding. I saw that behind the mask of confidence there was vulnerability, and that vulnerability was familiar to me. A doubt arose inside me: should I let him stay at the bottom or should I reach out to him? The moment I could have confronted him directly, I realized one thing: revenge isn't always satisfying. Taking a breath, I left him on his lap and left the room, deciding that my life needed to be filled with light, not darkness. I didn't want to participate in this game anymore, where every move only brings me closer to destruction. Returning to my room, I locked the door with a key, as if locking not only him in there, but all the darkness and betrayal that remained in our shared history. I began to organize my new life away from the deceit and double games. I put away all reminders of Nico. When the new morning came, a sense of freedom hovered around me, as if the morning light was spreading its arms and filling me with life. I stood at the window, letting in the fresh air and sunlight, and I suddenly realized that I didn't know what the future would bring, but I was ready to embrace it. I now had the courage to leave my criminal love behind, realizing that there were more inspiring paths. I decided to come out of my temporary shelter and open up to the world again. I realized that there were new horizons and opportunities, new acquaintances and adventures ahead. I took a step towards the unknown and decided that I would no longer allow anyone, not even Nico, to be an obstacle in my path. My soul was searching for something more. This morning was a symbol of a reset for me, a new beginning that I had been waiting for. I was ready to not only embrace the challenges that the future could bring, but to savor every moment it would provide me. And there was no more hate in my heart, only hope, light, and the desire to move forward. I looked out into the sunny morning and realized that everything starts right here, right now.